Suit up, strap in, warm the tires, and leave on yellow. Time for the MitsuTimes podcast, presented by MitsuTimes.org, the home of the fastest Mitsubishi cars. With your host, Josh.
Last episode, we talked about the beginning, the Mitsubishi 500 and the early Colt models, the Macau Grand Prix, the Japanese Grand Prix, and the first signs that Mitsubishi was becoming interested in something beyond simply building dependable transportation. Those early cars were small, they were light, and they were simple. And compared to the racing machines that would come later, they were not especially powerful, but they established a philosophy, one that we harped on in episode 1, a philosophy built around efficiency and durability, precision, weight reduction, and the idea that intelligent engineering could overcome a lack of brute force. We pick up where we left off at the beginning of the 1970s. Mitsubishi was not yet known around the world as a performance brand. There was no Lancer Evolution. There was no Galant VR-4. There was no Eclipse GSX. There was no Starion. There was no 4G63 Legend. There was not even a production Mitsubishi Motors organization in the form that we would even recognize today, until the beginning of this decade. But during the 1970s, nearly everything changed. The global automotive industry was forced to rethink what performance car could be. The American muscle car era was starting to collapse on itself. European rally was becoming faster, more professional, and technically demanding. Japanese manufacturers intensified their efforts to prove that they could compete with all these cars internationally. But fuel shortages changed what buyers expected from their vehicles. Emissions regulations changed how engines were designed. And manufacturers discovered that motorsports could prove something more valuable than publicity. It could become a laboratory, a place to test engines, suspensions, transmissions, cooling systems, and even body structures. And the durability of the entire vehicle under conditions that no ordinary road test could recreate. Mitsubishi entered the decade as an ambitious Japanese manufacturer with a collection of promising racing accomplishments, but it left this decade as one of the most respected names in international endurance rally. This was the decade of the Galant GTO, the Colt F2000, the very first Lancer, the 1600 GSR. We get introduced to Andrew Cowan, the Southern Cross Rally, the Safari Rally, and Joginder Singh. And Mitsubishi's transformation from an occasional motorsports participant into a legitimate international threat. This is not yet the story of turbocharging. This is not even the story of all-wheel drive. And it's not even the beginning of the story of the 4G63. Those developments belong in our next chapter. This is the story of the foundation, the cornerstone that made all of those possible. This is Mitsubishi Motorsports History, Part 2. You joined me in the year 1970. And for Mitsubishi, the beginning of the decade represented more than the arrival of several new cars. It represented the beginning of a new corporate identity. For decades, Mitsubishi's automotive operations had existed within the much larger Mitsubishi Heavy Industries organization. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries built far more than passenger cars, like we talked about in our last episode. It produced commercial vehicles, industrial machinery, ships, aircraft, and equipment intended to operate in some of the most demanding environments imaginable. And that industrial background influenced the company's approach to automotive engineering. Durability was not treated as an optional feature. It came standard. It was part of the culture. But as Japan's passenger car market exploded in the 1960s, Mitsubishi's automotive division needed its own independence. The company needed to react more quickly. It needed to develop new models, and it needed to expand internationally. It needed to separate itself from Toyota, Nissan, Datsun, Mazda, Honda, and the growing number of Japanese manufacturers competing for this global market. In 1970, Mitsubishi Motors Corporation was formally established. This is the moment in history where it all begins. Because the Mitsubishi that entered motorsports in the 1960s was still finding its direction. But the Mitsubishi of the 1970s was becoming a dedicated automotive manufacturer with international ambitions. And almost immediately, performance was part of the conversation. Not performance in the American sense of enormous engines and effortless torque. Mitsubishi's approach was different. Smaller engines, lightweight vehicles, high engine speeds, efficient packaging, and just some smart thinking. These were vehicles designed to continue operating after the road had disappeared. Those qualities would soon make Mitsubishi extremely dangerous in rally competition. But first, the company demonstrated that it would build something far more specialized. Something that looks almost nothing like a production Mitsubishi. Now, to understand why Mitsubishi moved in the direction that it did, we need to step back and look at the rest of the automotive world. Because in 1970, performance meant different things in different places. In the United States, performance was still dominated by displacement. Big block V8s, carburetors, rear-wheel drive, wide rear tires, quarter-mile acceleration, and an escalating horsepower war among Detroit's largest manufacturers. Ford had the Mustang, Chevy had the Camaro and the Chevelle, Pontiac had the GTO, Dodge had the Charger and the Challenger, Plymouth had the Roadrunner, GTX, and Barracuda. And these cars were loud, aggressive, but they were relatively affordable. And they were built during a period when fuel was inexpensive and manufacturers could sell performance with little concern for economy. The American formula is simple. Install the largest engine possible, send the power to the rear wheels, and advertise the results at the drag strip. But that formula was already under pressure. Insurance costs were rising, safety requirements were becoming stricter, and emissions regulations were beginning to reshape engine design. The enormous horsepower ratings that defined the late 1960s would soon begin to disappear from American advertisements. And across the pond, European manufacturers were developing a different understanding of performance. Europe had sports car racing, touring car racing, formula racing, hill climbs, and one of the most difficult disciplines in all of motorsports, rally. European rally cars did not compete exclusively on purpose-built circuits. They raced on public roads closed for competition. They crossed gravel, snow, mud, tarmac, mountain passes, through forest, and narrow roads lined with objects that offered zero forgiveness. A successful rally car needed much more than horsepower. It needed traction, predictable handling, ground clearance, suspension travel, strong brakes, accurate steering, a usable power band, and the ability to absorb repeated punishment without destroying itself. In Australia, long-distance rallying and endurance events were also gaining enormous importance. The country offered vast distances and brutally rough terrain. Events such as the Southern Cross Rally challenged cars with dust, rocks, changing road surfaces, and long hours of continuous competition. A car could be fast for 10 minutes and still be completely useless if it didn't survive for several days. But meanwhile, back in Japan, Japan's domestic motorsports scene was developing rapidly. Japanese manufacturers had spent much of the 1960s proving that their vehicles were no longer mere inexpensive alternatives to Western cars. But by the 1970s, they wanted to prove something greater. They wanted to show that Japanese engineering could win. All these companies, Toyota, Datsun, Mazda, Honda, Mitsubishi, they each followed a somewhat different path. Some concentrated on circuit racing, others explored rotary engines, some pursued sports cars, some even invested in touring cars, and some began looking closely at rallying. For Mitsubishi, rallying made an extraordinary amount of sense. The company did not need to imitate Detroit. It did not need to win cubic inch wars. It needed a form of motorsports that rewarded the qualities that Mitsubishi already understood: lightweight, efficiency, durability, mechanical simplicity, and the ability to continue moving under the most extreme conditions. Rallying was simply not another place for Mitsubishi to race. It was perfectly aligned with the company's engineering identity. Now, one of the first Mitsubishi vehicles to clearly express the new performance identity was the Galant GTO. Introduced at the beginning of the decade, the Galant GTO looked dramatically different from Mitsubishi's early compact sedans. Its proportions reflected the influence of American performance cars: a long hood, a short rear deck, a fastback style roofline, an aggressive front end, quad headlights, and a raised rear spoiler shape that became one of the car's most recognizable features. Even its name carried performance associations. GTO had already become famous through European and American performance cars. Mitsubishi's use of the badge signaled that this was intended to be more than just basic transportation. But although the styling was borrowed from American car culture, the engineering philosophy remained distinctly Japanese. The Galant GTO did not rely on a massive V8. It used a compact 4-cylinder engine, and its proportions was a lot smaller than American muscle car. It was lighter, and its performance came from engine speed, breathing efficiency, and careful tuning rather than just enormous displacement. The most significant version of the Galant GTO was the Galant GTO MR. The MR model used a high-performance version of Mitsubishi's 4G32 Saturn engine. This was a 1.6-liter four-cylinder with a single overhead cam head, and for competition, they even built a dual overhead cam version. Now, in the performance version, it produced around 125 horsepower. That number may sound modest through a modern lens, but remember, context is important. This was a lightweight, early 1970s production coupe using a sophisticated cylinder head at the time, with a dual overhead cam that was still relatively exotic. The GTO MR demonstrated that Mitsubishi was willing to build specialized performance hardware. It also provided a glimpse of a pattern that would continue through the company's history. Mitsubishi often developed advanced technology before the broader public associated the company with performance. Long before the 4G63 became one of the most famous Japanese four-cylinder engines ever, Mitsubishi engineers were already experimenting with high-revving twin-cam engines. Long before the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution carried aggressive aerodynamic bodywork, Mitsubishi was creating distinctive performance coupes. And long before the company became synonymous with rallying, it was trying to determine which forms of motorsports offered the greatest return. The Galant GTO appeared to have genuine racing potential. But Mitsubishi Motorsports' direction was still evolving. Circuit racing remained part of the program. And in 1971, the company produced one of the most technically ambitious racing machines in its entire history. When most people hear the words Mitsubishi race car, they imagine a production-based vehicle, a Lancer, a Galant, a Starion, a Pajero, an Eclipse, or an Evolution. But in 1971, Mitsubishi created something entirely different. A purpose-built, open-wheeled Formula car. The Colt F2000. Now, the Colt name had already appeared on several Mitsubishi production cars. But the F2000 was not a modified Colt road car. It did not begin life as a sedan or a coupe. It was a dedicated competition machine built around the requirements of Japanese Formula 2000 racing. This meant a tubular steel space frame chassis, very minimal bodywork, an open cockpit, exposed wheels, and a mid-mounted engine. This design focused on achieving the lowest possible weight while maintaining the stiffness required for high-speed circuit racing. The bodywork was formed around lightweight glass fiber reinforced material. The front suspension used double wishbone with coil springs mounted over the dampers. The rear suspension used a more complex arrangement designed to control wheel movement under acceleration, braking, and cornering. Power was transmitted through a 5-speed Hewland racing gearbox. Hewland transmissions were used widely in international Formula racing because they were compact, lightweight, and designed to allow teams to change gear ratios for different circuits. But the most important part of the Colt F2000 was its engine. The R39B was a 2.0 liter, inline 4, dual overhead cam, 4 valves per cylinder, fuel injected, and it incorporated transistorized ignition technology. In other words, Mitsubishi was building a fuel-injected, 16-valve, twin-cam, naturally aspirated race four-cylinder in 1971. That's remarkable because many of those features probably sound familiar to most of us. The engine reportedly made 280 horsepower, and keep in mind it did that without a turbocharger or any other power adder. To create that amount of power with 2 liters, the R39B needed to breathe efficiently and operate at extremely high engine speeds. That required precise control of the valve train, careful combustion chamber design, strong internal components, accurate fuel delivery, and the ability to manage heat while the engine remained near its operating limits. The entire Colt F2000 weighed approximately 470 kilograms. That's just over 1,000 pounds. Combine that weight with roughly 280 horsepower, and the result is just a crazy power-to-weight ratio. The F2000 was not simply quick by Mitsubishi standards. It was legitimate formula racing car capable of competing against purpose-built machines from experienced constructors at that point. At the 1971 Japanese Grand Prix, Kuniomi Nagamatsu drove the Mitsubishi to victory. The result proved that Mitsubishi's early circuit racing success had not been an accident. The company could design a chassis, it could develop an advanced racing engine, and it could integrate the two, and it could win one of Japan's most important motorsports events. But the significance of the F2000 extends beyond a single victory. The car offers a glimpse into an alternative version of Mitsubishi history, Bizarro World Mitsubishi. Imagine a Mitsubishi that continued heavily into formula racing. Imagine additional generations of open-wheeled engines, international Formula 2 competition, perhaps even a long-term path towards the highest level of circuit racing. That future never fully developed. Mitsubishi would continue to apply advanced engineering to competition, but its greatest international success would not come from open-wheeled racing. The company found a discipline that better matched both its production vehicles and its institutional strengths. The Colt F2000 showed how advanced Mitsubishi could be. Rallying would show how tough Mitsubishi could be. And toughness was about to become the company's most valuable weapon. Now, rallying, as you could probably imagine, in the early 1970s was very different from the highly controlled competition we see on TV today. Roads were rougher, events were longer, safety standards were barely there, navigation could be extremely difficult, no GPS, just going off a map. Service crews had fewer opportunities to repair the cars. Communication was obviously much more limited, and a smaller mechanical failure could strand a team hundreds of miles from any meaningful assistance. This created a very specific engineering challenge. A rally car could not simply just be fast. It had to remain fast for hours or even days. Abuse after abuse. It had to tolerate contaminated air, poor fuel qualities, extreme temperature changes, repeated impacts, water crossings, loose rocks, ruts, mud, dust, and the drivers who were asking the car to operate at its limits for distances far beyond an ordinary circuit race. The environment rewarded a manufacturer with experience in durable machinery, and Mitsubishi's industrial background mattered right here, right now. The company understood the components had to be engineered as a system, not just individually. A powerful engine was useless if the cooling system couldn't keep it alive. A strong transmission was useless if the suspension failed and left the car stranded. A fast car was useless if its body structure cracked in half after the first bump. And a sophisticated design was useless if the mechanics could not repair it beside a dirt road with just some hand tools. Rally development forced engineers to think about the entire vehicle: the suspension mounting points, the shock absorbers, the steering components, the axles, the differentials, the gearbox, the oiling system, air filtration, the brakes, the wheels, the tires, and the placement of every vulnerable component beneath the car and inside the car. It forced engineers to learn from their failures. In rallying, the damaged parts told a story. A bent suspension arm explains where the loads are entering the chassis. An overheated engine explains whether the cooling package is sufficient. A damaged oil pan reveals where protection is inadequate. A broken gearbox exposes the difference between laboratory strength and real-world durability. Every rally became a test. Every retirement became data. And every finish gave Mitsubishi more information about how to build a stronger vehicle. The company needed the right production platform to put that philosophy into practice. And that platform arrived in 1973. And its name was Lancer. Now, today, the Lancer name is inseparable from Mitsubishi performance. For many enthusiasts, it immediately creates the image of the Evo. Turbocharged 4G63 engines, all-wheel drive, large rear wings, Tommy Mäkinen, Group A rallying, and some of the most intense performance car rivalries of the 1990s and 2000s. But the original Lancer was much, much simpler. Introduced in 1973, the first generation Lancer was a compact, front-engine, rear-wheel drive car. It was designed to occupy the space between Mitsubishi's smaller models and the much larger Galant. Its conventional mechanical layout was not revolutionary, but the simplicity became an advantage. The car was compact, it was relatively light, it was easy to understand, and easy to reinforce. It was well suited to the stresses of rally. For competition, Mitsubishi developed the Lancer 1600 GSR. GSR stood for Grand Sport Racing, and this was not merely an appearance package. The 1600 GSR was the performance foundation Mitsubishi needed. At its core was again the 4G32 Saturn engine, but the production GSR used a single overhead cam version of the engine with twin carburetors and a performance-oriented tuning. The rally engines were developed beyond ordinary showroom specifications, with modifications intended to increase power while maintaining reliability over long distances. Now, the 4G32 is an important part of Mitsubishi's engine history. Today, the 4G engine designation immediately makes people think of the 4G63. But the 4G63 did not appear out of nowhere. Mitsubishi had already spent years learning how to design and develop compact four-cylinder engines. The Saturn family provided experience in combustion, cylinder head designs, carburation, lubrication, cooling, high RPM durability, and adapting production-based engines for competition. The rally specification Lancer was not built around the highest horsepower figure Mitsubishi could possibly achieve. That would have missed the point. The engine needed usable torque, predictable throttle response, and the ability to continue running after repeated hours at high load. The car also required significant protection, stronger suspension components, reinforced mounting points, underbody protection, improved dampers, competition brakes, appropriate gearing, additional lights, and a fuel system designed for events covering enormous distances. A rally car is a chain of components, and the entire chain must survive. One link breaks, the whole car breaks. In 1973, Mitsubishi took the Lancer 1600 GSR into one of the events best suited to expose every weakness it might have, the Southern Cross Rally.
Left 4, overcrest tightens, don't cut.
The Southern Cross Rally was one of Australia's defining international motorsports events. It combined speed with endurance. Competitors faced extremely long distances, night driving, loose surfaces, dust that reduced visibility, roads capable of damaging suspension and tires, and conditions that changed as the event moved through different regions. This was not an easy debut for a newly introduced rally platform. But Mitsubishi did not send the Lancer to Australia simply to gather publicity. The company wanted to understand the car. It wanted to test its durability. And it wanted to prove that the lightweight sedan could compete against established international machinery. A man named Andrew Cowan played a central role in this. Cowan was a Scottish rally driver whose relationship with Mitsubishi would become one of the most important partnerships in the company's motorsports history. He was not just simply fast. He understood endurance. He knew how to preserve a car. He knew when to attack, and he knew that in a long rally, the driver who appears quickest at the beginning is not always the driver who makes it to the finish. Mechanical sympathy is difficult to measure. It involves feeling the vehicle and what it's doing, recognizing a change in the vibration, knowing when the brakes are becoming too hot, understanding when a damaged component requires a reduction in speed, and avoiding the unnecessary impact that ends a rally hundreds of miles before the finish. Those qualities made Cowan exceptionally valuable to Mitsubishi. During the first Southern Cross Rally campaign for the Lancer in 1973, the car made an immediate statement. Lancers occupied the first 4 finishing positions: first, second, third, fourth. Think about that. One car winning could be attributed to a remarkable driver. 2 cars finishing would suggest a strong team. But 4 cars in the first 4 positions demonstrated depth. It showed that the platform was competitive, more than competitive. The engine package worked. The suspension worked. The service strategy worked. And the cars could survive the event designed to break them. The result transformed the Lancer from a new compact sedan into an international rally weapon. Mitsubishi had found its platform. Now the company needed to prove that the Southern Cross result was not limited to one event or one type of terrain. The next great test would be even more severe: Africa. Now, the Safari Rally was not merely another round of the International Rally Circuit. It was one of the most punishing automotive competitions in the world. Its origins were connected to the East Africa Coronation Safari of the early 1950s. Over time, it became known simply as the Safari Rally. The event crossed huge distances through Kenya and during portions of its history surrounding East Africa territories. Conditions could change dramatically within a single event. One section might be dry and covered in dust, and another could be flooded. A road that was passable during reconnaissance could become a river by the time the competition day arrived. Cars encountered mud deep enough to stop them, rocks capable of tearing open oil pans, ruts deep enough to damage suspension, heat that punished any cooling system, water that invaded electrical components, dust that entered engines and destroyed internal surfaces, animals, public traffic, unpredictable road conditions, and long stretches in which the driver and navigator were effectively alone. The Safari was closer to an expedition than it was a modern sprint rally. Its length was measured in thousands of kilometers. The cars were required to carry additional equipment and reinforcement. Ride height was increased. Protection was added beneath the engine and transmission. Suspension components were strengthened. Cooling systems were prepared for heat and low-speed operation. Air filtration became critical. And the body shell itself had to withstand repeated twisting and impact loads. A car could set quick times and still lose everything because of one broken component. That reality changed the driver's job. The Safari could not always be won through maximum aggression. Drivers had to read the terrain. They had to decide whether obstacles could be attacked and which had to be respected. They had to understand that finishing the event was the first requirement for winning it. And few drivers understood that balance better than Joginder Singh.
This episode of the MitsuTimes podcast is brought to you by Rick's Racing. Rick's Racing is located in Morgantown, West Virginia, and has been supporting the DSM and Evo communities for over 15 years. They are the home of the world's quickest Mitsubishi-powered convertible. They are known for their huge selection of new and used parts and expert tuning with their in-house all-wheel drive dyno. They offer every kind of service, everything from a simple diagnosis to a ground-up restore, full engine build, and even auto transmission rebuilds. They even make their own gaskets and 3D print parts like their 4G63 timing indicator and fog light deletes. Check out everything they have to offer at ricksracing.com.
Joginder Singh was already a legendary figure in East Africa rallying before his greatest Mitsubishi successes. Born in Kenya to parents of Indian heritage, Singh developed an extraordinary understanding of the region's terrain. He knew the roads. He understood the quickly changing weather. He understood how quickly a seemingly manageable route could become almost impassable. And he understood what the Safari demanded from both the driver and the machine. Singh became famous not only for speed, but for persistence. He had already won the Safari before joining Mitsubishi's campaign. His experience made him an ideal partner for the Lancer 1600 GSR. The car was lightweight and compact. That helped it change direction on narrow and unpredictable roads. Its relative simplicity helped make repairs possible and quick. Its engine did not produce the largest amount of power in the field, but it was responsive and durable. The entire package reflected Mitsubishi's growing understanding that the fastest Safari car was not necessarily the car with the most impressive stat sheet. It was the car that could maintain the highest effective speed while continuously surviving. In 1974, Singh drove the Lancer 1600 GSR to victory in the Safari Rally. That was Mitsubishi's first victory in World Rally Championship. The championship itself had only begun in 1973, initially awarding a manufacturer's title rather than individual drivers' championships that would arrive later. That makes Mitsubishi's timing significant. The company established itself as a WRC winner during the championship's formative years, and it did so at the Safari, one of the most prestigious and difficult events on the calendar. The victory gave Mitsubishi incredible credibility that advertising alone could never purchase. A manufacturer could describe its car as durable. It could show carefully staged photographs. It could make claims about reliability. But winning the Safari Rally was physical evidence. The Lancer had competed against the road, the weather, the distance, the opposition, and its own mechanical limits, and it survived all of them. For Mitsubishi, the victory was more than a trophy. It confirmed the direction of the program. The company's future in motorsports would be tied to rallying, and the Lancer's name would be at the center of it. Now, Mitsubishi's rally program did not depend on a single victory. After the Lancer's top 4 sweep in 1973, the car continued to establish itself in Australia. The Lancer 1600 GSR won the Southern Cross Rally again in 1974, and again in 1975, and again in 1976. Andrew Cowan became closely associated with those victories. His consistency matched the character of the car. Cowan did not need the Lancer to be the most powerful machine in every section. He needed it to respond predictably. He needed it to protect its tires. He needed it to remain stable over rough surfaces. He needed it to reach the final control point. The repeated Southern Cross victories demonstrated that Mitsubishi's success was not accidental. The company was building an organized international rally operation. Engineers were learning from each event. The cars were becoming more and more revised. Weak points were becoming identified. Service procedures were improving. And the relationship between drivers, navigators, engineers, and mechanics was becoming more and more sophisticated. This development process is one of the most important and least visible parts of motorsports history. Fans see the finished car. They see the winner standing at the podium holding the trophy. They see the photographs from the final results. But behind the moments are hundreds of small decisions. A thinner bracket, a revised spring rate, a different shock absorber setting, pressure in the tires, a change in final drive ratio, additional protection around a fuel line, a new method of sealing an electric connector, a revised engine component, a faster service procedure. Individually, those changes seem so insignificant, but together they transform a fragile competition car into a championship caliber machine. Mitsubishi was learning how to operate at this level. And by 1976, the company was ready to produce the most convincing Safari Rally result of the Lancer's career. Now, winning one Safari Rally proved Mitsubishi could succeed. Winning again would prove that the first victory was not a fortunate accident. But in 1976, Mitsubishi accomplished more than another overall victory. The Lancer 1600 GSR finished first, second, and third. A clean sweep of the podium. Singh led the Mitsubishi result, and the significance of a 1-2-3 finish cannot be overstated here. Rallying contains too many variables for domination to be this easy. One car can suffer a puncture, another can encounter a mechanical failure, a driver can make a mistake, weather can favor one competitor and punish another. Road conditions can change between cars. A service crew can lose time, and an event as long as the Safari creates hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities for failure. Placing 3 cars at the front required more than speed. It required preparation, parts quality, team organization, driver discipline, top-notch service support, and a vehicle platform with enough strength to survive the event repeatedly. The 1976 result established the Lancer 1600 GSR as one of the great endurance rally cars of its era. It also reinforced a reputation that would follow Mitsubishi for the rest of its life. This reputation was building cars that could withstand punishment. The identity that would eventually become central to the Pajero's dominance in long-distance rally raids. It would help define the Galant VR-4. It would become part of the mythology surrounding the Lancer evolution. But in 1976, that reputation belonged to a compact, rear-wheel drive sedan with a naturally aspirated 1.6-liter engine. No turbocharger forcing additional air into the cylinders. No computer-controlled differential. No active yaw control. The Lancer won through balance, durability, lightweight, preparation, and the ability to remain effective when more power or more sophisticated machinery began to fail. That may be one of the most important lessons of Mitsubishi's 1970s rally program. Advanced technology matters, but the technology must survive. Power matters, but power must reach the finish line. And speed matters, but only when it can be repeated over and over again for the entire event. When Mitsubishi was developing its rally reputation, the global automotive industry was experiencing a crisis. In 1973, oil-producing nations imposed an embargo that contributed to severe fuel shortages and rapidly rising prices in several major markets. Long lines formed at gas stations. Governments introduced restrictions. Consumers who had previously given little thought to fuel consumption suddenly began calculating how far a vehicle could travel on each gallon. The crisis did not single-handedly end the American muscle car era. Insurance costs, emissions regulations, safety requirements, and changing consumer tastes were already reshaping that market. But the oil shock accelerated the transformation. Large engines became more and more difficult to justify. Vehicle weight became important. Efficiency became a major selling point. And manufacturers that had spent years developing compact cars suddenly possessed an enormous advantage. Japanese automakers were well positioned. Their domestic market had encouraged smaller vehicles already. Japan's limited natural resources made efficiency especially important. Tax structures favored compact engine displacement. And dense urban areas rewarded cars that used space intelligently. Mitsubishi had already been developing the type of vehicle the changing market now demanded: compact, efficient, relatively light, durable. The company did not need to abandon an identity built entirely around large displacement engines. Its challenge was different. Mitsubishi had to maintain performance while satisfying increasingly strict emissions and fuel economy requirements. That challenge would influence the engine technologies of the late 1970s and beyond. But we should be careful not to jump too far ahead. The oil crisis did not cause Mitsubishi to instantly produce the turbocharged or electrically managed performance cars of the following decade. Those technologies required years of development. What the crisis did was change the problem engineers were being asked to solve. The future would not simply reward the manufacturer that could build the largest engine. It would reward the manufacturer that could extract more from less. More power, less displacement. More work, less fuel. Better handling, less weight. And a greater durability for more compact machinery. This was exactly the kind of engineering that Mitsubishi was prepared to pursue. By the second half of the decade, the Lancer 1600 GSR had already secured its place in Mitsubishi history. It had swept the leading positions in Australia. It had won the Safari Rally. It had delivered Mitsubishi's first WRC victory. And it had returned to the Safari to take all three podium positions. But the car's factory story was not quite finished. In December 1977, Mitsubishi entered the Bandama Rally in the Ivory Coast. Like the Safari, the Bandama was an African endurance rally known for extreme difficulty. The event's combination of heat, distance, rough roads, and attrition created another environment in which durability mattered as much as raw speed. Andrew Cowan and Joginder Singh finished first and second. It was an appropriate ending for the Lancer 1600 GSR's works career. Two of the drivers most closely connected with Mitsubishi's rise occupied the top two positions, and the car completed its factory career doing what it had done repeatedly throughout the decade: surviving. The Lancer 1600 GSR's accomplishments are sometimes overshadowed by the turbocharged and all-wheel drive cars that followed. It's understandable. The later machines were much faster, much more powerful, more technologically advanced, and supported by the enormous global popularity of the Lancer evolution. But the evolution story cannot be separated from the original Lancer. The first Rally Lancer established the name. It created the international reputation. It taught Mitsubishi how to organize a factory rally effort. It created relationships with drivers and engineers. And it demonstrated a compact Mitsubishi sedan that would become a world-class competition car. The Lancer 1600 GSR was not a primitive Evo. It belonged to a different era and followed a different engineering formula. But it established the philosophy that the later Lancers would inherit. Start with a practical, compact car, strengthen it, improve its engine, adapt its suspension, and test it on the hardest conditions available. Learn from every failure and continue developing the car until it becomes something the original road car buyer would barely even imagine. By the time the Lancer 1600 GSR completed its works career, Mitsubishi Motorsports' identity had already become much clearer. At the beginning of the decade, the company had multiple possible paths. The Galant GTO suggested a future in production-based circuit racing. the Colt F2000 demonstrated that Mitsubishi could build sophisticated open-wheel car and an advanced racing engine. The Lancer proved that the company could dominate endurance rallies. But motorsports programs required enormous investments. A manufacturer cannot pursue every discipline at the highest level indefinitely. Formula racing requires specialized chassis development, specialized engines, continuous aerodynamic evolution, and a technical program that may share relatively little with ordinary production vehicles. Rallying offered Mitsubishi a more direct connection to the cars it actually sold. A basic architecture of the rally car could remain recognizable. A sedan body, a production-derived engine, a conventional gearbox, suspension based on the road-going platform. The modifications were extensive, but the relationship was visible, and that mattered for marketing. The customer could look at a rally-winning Lancer and then walk into the dealership and purchase a Lancer that looked just like it. It also mattered for engineering. Lessons about durability, cooling, suspension strength, body rigidity, and engine reliability could influence production car development. The Colt F2000 remained an extraordinary technical achievement, but the Lancer offered Mitsubishi something much more valuable. A motorsports identity that could be carried across generations of road cars. The decision was not announced in a single dramatic moment. There was no ceremony declaring that rallying would become Mitsubishi's future. Instead, the results made the direction increasingly obvious. The Lancer was winning. The victories were internationally relevant. The production connection was strong. And the events emphasized exactly the characteristics Mitsubishi wanted associated with its vehicles. By the end of the 1970s, rallying was no longer one experiment among many. It had become central to Mitsubishi's performance identity. The final years of the 1970s placed Mitsubishi between two distinct eras. Behind it was the age of relatively simple, naturally aspirated rally cars. Cars in which mechanical strength, low weight, carburation, suspension tuning, and driver endurance determined the success. Ahead, though, was a new age. Engine technology was quickly advancing. Electronic systems were becoming more practical. Manufacturers were experimenting with methods to increase specific output. Aerodynamics was becoming more and more important. Tire technology was rapidly improving. Rally cars were becoming more specialized, and the level of factory involvement was increasing. Mitsubishi also continued expanding its production range. Remember, the company had entered the decade newly separated as a dedicated automotive corporation, but it left the decade with a much broader identity. It built small economy cars, commercial vehicles, coupes, sedans, and increasingly sophisticated export models. The Lancer name continued, the Galant name continued, and in 1979, Mitsubishi introduced a new generation known as the Lancer EX in several markets. The Lancer EX represented the next stage of the platform's development. But for the purpose of this episode, we will stop with its arrival, because the most famous competition developments associated with that new generation belong to the period beginning in 1980. We're not going to steal anything from the story of episode 3. For now, what matters is the foundation. Mitsubishi had a recognized compact performance nameplate. It had international rally experience. It had proven engines. It had drivers who understood endurance competition. It had engineers who knew how to convert production cars into rally machines. And it had a corporate identity built increasingly around advanced, efficient engineering. The company was prepared for the next technological revolution. It just simply had not unleashed it yet. The 1970s gave Mitsubishi several lessons that would influence nearly every major motorsports program that followed. The first lesson was that durability could become a form of performance. A car that remains operational can defeat a faster car that breaks. Now, this sounds obvious, but building durability without making a vehicle excessively heavy is extremely difficult. Components must be strengthened selectively. Engineers must understand load paths. They must identify what is likely to fail. They must reinforce the vehicle without destroying the handling and the acceleration that made it competitive in the first place. The second lesson was that production-based motorsports could create a powerful brand identity. The Colt F2000 was technically spectacular, but the Lancer connected racing success to a name customers could recognize in the showroom. That connection would become central to Mitsubishi's later performance cars. The third lesson was that smaller engines could compete through efficiency and intelligent design. The Lancer did not win the Safari Rally because it had the greatest displacement. It won because the entire package worked. The engine, the weight, the suspension, the gearbox, the drivers, the navigator, the service operation, and the preparation. The fourth lesson was that extreme competition creates valuable engineering knowledge. Mitsubishi did not simply collect trophies from Southern Cross, Safari, and Bandama rallies. It collected information about heat, dust, water, vibration, impact, fatigue, lubrication, cooling, and the behavior of components under conditions far beyond normal road use. The fifth lesson was that the Lancer name could carry a performance legacy. When the Lancer appeared in 1973, it was a new compact design. By the end of 1977, the name was already associated with international rally victories. That reputation existed years before the first evolution. Years before all-wheel drive became central to Mitsubishi's identity, and years before the arrival of the engine that would define the company's modern performance era. The evolution did not create the Lancer's rallying identity from nothing. It inherited an identity established in the 1970s. Let's put the decade in perspective. In 1970, Mitsubishi Motors Corporation was established as a dedicated automotive company. The same period introduced vehicles such as the Galant GTO, which gave Mitsubishi a much more visible performance range. In 1971, the Mitsubishi Colt F2000 demonstrated the depth of Mitsubishi's technical ambition. It was a purpose-built open-wheel chassis, a lightweight structure, high-speed racing gearbox, a naturally aspirated fuel-injected 16-valve R39B engine producing 280 horsepower. The car won the Japanese Grand Prix. In 1973, the first generation of the Lancer arrived. The Lancer 1600 GSR entered the Southern Cross Rally and helped Mitsubishi sweep the top 4 spots. The same year, the World Rally Championship began. And in 1974, Joginder Singh drove the Lancer 1600 GSR to victory in the Safari Rally. It was Mitsubishi's first WRC victory. The Lancer also began a run of 3 consecutive Southern Cross victories from 1974 through 1976. In 1976, Mitsubishi returned to the Safari Rally and filled the entire podium, first, second, and third. In 1977, Andrew Cowan and Joginder Singh finished first and second at the Bandama Rally. It was the final factory rally for the Lancer 1600 GSR. In 1979, a new Lancer generation had arrived. The naturally aspirated endurance rallying era was starting to come to an end, and a new technological period was beginning. Mitsubishi had entered the 1970s searching for an international motorsports identity, but Mitsubishi left the decade finding one. And its identity was not based on copying European or American manufacturers. It was based on the idea that would define the company's greatest competition cars. Use technology intelligently, keep the platform compact, make every component work together, and build the car strong enough to survive places where other machines would fail. The 1960s introduced Mitsubishi to motorsports. The 1970s taught Mitsubishi how to win internationally. But beginning in 1980, the formula would change. The naturally aspirated Lancer 1600 GSR had established a name. Now Mitsubishi's engineers would begin looking for more power, more traction, more advanced engine controls, and new ways to turn lessons learned in endurance rallying into the performance technology of a whole new decade. Episode 3 begins in 1980. We will follow the new generation of Lancer into the era of turbocharging. We will examine Mitsubishi's early turbocharged rally efforts, the Lancer EX2000 Turbo, the changing international rally regulations, the rise of Group B, Mitsubishi's experiments with four-wheel drive technology, the developments of the Starion, and the engineering path that would eventually lead towards the Galant VR-4, the 4G63, and eventually the Lancer Evolution. The story only exists because of what was happening in this episode. The Colt F2000, the 4G32, Andrew Cowan, Joginder Singh, Southern Cross Rally, Safari Rally, and because a small rear-wheel drive sedan proved that Mitsubishi could compete against the world and win. The 1970s gave Mitsubishi experience. They gave Mitsubishi credibility. But most importantly, they gave Mitsubishi a motorsports identity. The modern Mitsubishi performance era was almost here, but not quite yet. This was Mitsubishi Motorsports Part 2, the decade that built the Lancer. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the MitsuTimes podcast. Check out our Instagram and Facebook for daily updates. Get added to our list by going to MitsuTimes.org and clicking Submit a Slip. Thank you to all of our sponsors.